up, everybody? June 2nd, 2025 on a Monday. Welcome to Cozy Corner TV, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Kieran Smith, call me Q, and we are on the corner. We are on the corner. What is up, y'all? What is up? Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. Say what's up in the chat as you come in. You guys know the daily drill. Daily live streams over here every single day except for Sunday as of right now. But welcome to the live stream, you guys. Hit that like button as you come in. As per usual, I'm going to go down the menu and talk about what we're going to be digesting today. Because I am a big advocate for mental health and wellness, I ask that you are grounded and regulated before we take this in. Why? Because news can be triggering. If you are grounded or regulated, if you're not, don't watch this right now, come back later. But if you are, what up? Welcome to the live stream. So first up on the menu, guys, we got shout out to MSNBC. Even though they are not a fan favorite over here, we do cover the news. So sometimes we look at just how they've covered a certain topic. Why several Democratic governors have become formidable candidates for 2028. So I was excited to see this headline because I'm like, I want to see who they're going to put up. For the last couple of weeks, we've seen, even for the last couple of months, pretty much post-election, but not right away. I would say at least 90 days after. We've seen, the last couple weeks, we've seen the Democrats kind of throwing up some possible candidates for 2028. I have already said I do not think that there's anybody that they can put up that's going to go against really any Republican, especially if it's any type of combination in Trump's cabinet. And that's just going off of just what the mandate from the American people were when we saw what happened in 2024. But we'll take a look at it. Then we'll switch gears and go to Charlie Kirk. Can you be a Christian and a nationalist? Shout out to Charlie Kirk. We like Charlie over here on the channel, so we're going to react to that pretty fiery conversation. I enjoyed it. I thought Charlie held his ground pretty well. And then we'll switch gears. We'll go over to next up with Mark Halperin. Shout out to Mark Halperin. Democratic Party is heading for a civil war between the AOC and Schumer wings, the new Greenwich. So this is interesting because AOC versus Schumer. It's to see this headline, I personally think it's a disgrace because she's so young, and he's like what you would call an OG in the Democratic Party, right? He's a ranking member. So I don't know what's going on over there. Like, we know media can take things and spin it completely out of control, but we'll take a look at that. And then we're going to jump over to Thomas Sowell React. Shout out to Thomas Sowell. Sowell exposes CBS host, the real dangers to America's free speech. Thomas Sowell Reacts. And then we'll go over to, shout out to Cliff Buell. We are in the live stream with a Christian clip from Cliff Buell today, talking about the U.S. military will be playing. All right, guys, let's take a look at the first clip up. For the day, we got why several Democratic governors have become formidable candidates for 2028. So we're going to take a look at that. Let me shout out the chat real quick. All right, you guys ain't talking. Let's take a look.
I know I'm not running. But the thing I'm also very clear about is, anyone who's talking about 2028 is not taking 2025 very seriously. We are watching direct assaults on our communities, direct assaults on our neighbors, direct assaults on our legacies. That's taking place right now.
This is the time. This is the time when people are going to learn that you are not just going to attack us and it's we march, we push, we get results, and we win.
Well, that is Maryland Governor Wes Moore speaking Friday in South Carolina at Congressman Jim Clyburn's world-famous fish fry. And the man my next guest says is the 2028 Democratic candidate that no one's talking about. So now you are, the journalist and MSNBC political analyst Alexis McCammon is joining me now. Good to see you. Your latest piece on Substack, The Myth of the Political Savior, Why Democrats Keep Falling for the Same Fantasy, and What It's Costing Us. Wow, let's get into that, because you heard him say that he's not running in 2028. But what is the significance of him showing up at this event in South Carolina?
Yeah, Alex, thank you for having me. And, frankly, it's a smart thing for him to answer that he's not running, because he's showing that he's focused on not just the present moment, but of course being governor and governing for the people in this moment. But a lot of folks should be talking about Wes Moore as a potential 2028 candidate, in part because of that. Because he is someone who has this substance and has been a servant to his country in many different ways. He's a military vet. He formerly ran the Robin Hood Foundation. He's a Harvard grad. He's a public servant through and through, but he's not someone who wants to sort of oversaturate the airwaves or make everything about himself. What's also interesting about him showing up to that event, though, is that there were some Democrats who wanted to disinvite him from that dinner altogether in South Carolina because he vetoed a bill in Maryland to give reparations to folks in his state. And that's an interesting 2028 calculus too, because of course he's a Democratic governor in a blue state where he could do something that progressive, but people might consider that too radical, and it could come back to haunt him in 2028 if he does run.
Interesting. So look, Democrats could potentially have a pretty deep bench in the next presidential cycle. Shouldn't voters hear from other contenders like Governor Andy Beshear, Governor J.D. Pritzker, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Governor Gavin Newsom, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris? I mean, don't they all have something to say people should hear?
Absolutely, they do. And I think we're going to hear from a lot of them and then some. And you're already seeing a lot of those folks step out. I mean, we just saw Governor Tim Walz, as you showed in that video, with Governor Moore as well. But we see other people. Gavin Newsom has started his own podcast. Pete Buttigieg has gone across the airwaves. People are talking about Governor Gretchen Whitmer. You'll notice it's a lot of Democratic governors, and I think that's an interesting through line for people to consider too. Of course, big names like Pete Buttigieg are an exception to that, and they get a lot of attention because he's grown and built so much name recognition at this point. But governors in particular have proven to be really formidable candidates and kind of proven servants and lawmakers who get things done for the people in a way that folks who serve at the national level don't have that same view all the time.
Yeah, certainly not of late. So Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been sharing the stage with Senator Bernie Sanders on the Fighting Oligarchy Tour, drawing enormous crowds. Several polls show her emerging as a favorite among Democrats for 2028. Do you see her, Alexi, as a viable option?
Yeah, it's funny because I think a lot of the polls are showing folks with great name ID, and obviously AOC, like Pete Buttigieg, has that. She also has a lot of star power. You see the rallies and the people she's able to bring to these events with Senator Bernie Sanders. The problem, of course, is that we've seen this time again. We've seen it with Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton. Folks are reluctant to elect a woman to be president, even and especially within the Democratic Party. And folks that I have heard conversationally and otherwise will say straight up, I love Bernie Sanders, I hate that AOC. And it's so interesting when you stop to consider or question why, because it goes to those familiar themes we hear about, oh, I just don't like her, I don't like the way she talks, she's all about herself, she's full of herself. When her ideology is the same as Bernie Sanders and they love him, it's just a different messenger they want.
Boy, that is a conversation we should have. We could do several minutes, a full hour on that kind of thing, big picture. But Alexi McCammon, thank you so much for now.
That's kind of crazy because some of those candidates that they're putting up, they are the exact ones that we talk about here on the live stream every single day. What did I say? Pete Buttigieg. I can't even say his name because it drives me so crazy. But we got Pete Buttigieg. So I've seen Pete up there since probably about at least 2 months ago. We got Pete up there. We got Kamala up there. We got Gavin Newsom up there. We got Tim Walz there. We have, who was this last person that they were saying? Hakeem Jeffries, but he hasn't said anything officially, right? People have said something about Westmoreland, which he's probably some of the better of the Democratic candidates or governors that could be put up. Let's see. We got John Fetterman. I don't think John's bad. He's from Pennsylvania. I mean, people can't stand the way he dresses, but other than that, I think that's childish. I don't think John's bad at all. But again, the Democrats, they're gonna have a hard time. Like, they're gonna have a hard time with this, putting somebody up for 2028, because right now it doesn't matter who they present. I always say, like, no, it doesn't matter what combination I can think about on the more conservative side. I just don't see them taking a win. All right, guys. So switching gears to Charlie Kirk. Can you become a Christian? Can you be a Christian and a nationalist? So this was Charlie at a campus. talking to a student about can you be Christian and a nationalist. I'm not gonna play the whole entire clip, but Charlie makes some great points here, so let's take a look.
Hello,
how are you?
Good. My name is Nick. I'm an aerospace engineering student here. Got a couple questions.
Awesome.
All right. So I'm particularly concerned about your brand of Christianity. As a Christian myself, Christian nationalism, I do not agree with at all. I think it's antithetical to the values of the early church. And I think, how do you reconcile especially white Christians in this America, marrying politics and power with their faith in this country?
There's a lot there. I've never described myself as a Christian nationalist. So I'm a Christian and a nationalist, so I've never used those two.
And then right there, that and nationalist, where in the scriptures does a Christian...
Well, thank you. Jeremiah 29:7, demand the welfare of the nation that you are in, because your welfare is tied to your nation's welfare. Let me continue. Daniel fasted and prayed for his nation. Esther and Mordecai cared for their nation. They were counsel of the king.
Right.
Nehemiah, Jeremiah, Joseph, Jacob. I can keep on going. Moses, Aaron. In fact, Moses was so political that he wrote an entire book of the Torah all about how to set up a government. It's the book of Deuteronomy. So, in fact, the Bible is an explicitly political text amongst many other things.
Now, can we interpret those texts in the light of the revelation of Christ? Because you just cited all Old Testament texts, but you've not once cited St. Paul.
Okay, yeah. If you want me to also, by the way, just so we are
St. Paul about the kingdom of heaven and the government.
Just so we're clear, do you think that the New Testament is greater than the Old Testament?
It is. It is greater because the revelation of Christ dictates how we interpret the Old Testament.
So you think that all of a sudden, like Genesis 1 is not as great just because of the New Testament?
The Old Testament was a type and shadow of the things to come, and now we live in the full revelation of Christ.
Again, that is such a dangerous theological...
That's not true. That's Christological theology.
Hold on. Of course I believe in the resurrection. But to all of a sudden say that like in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth is like somehow in like lesser because of the revelation of the New Testament. Christ even said, I did not come to abolish the law of the prophets, I came to fulfill the law. In fact, he said all the laws of the prophet hang on the two teachings, Leviticus 19 and Deuteronomy 3-5. However, to use a New Testament example, as you asked, it says in 1 Timothy, pray for your leaders in authority by name that they might make great decisions. I'm going to continue. Christ our Lord said, on this rock build my what?
Church.
Wrong. Ecclesia. It's not the word church.
Okay,
the word
English
church,
translations of Common Bible say church, so my bad.
well, actually, it shouldn't, because the original Greek term says, on this rock build my government structure. Ecclesia was a secular word used in that time, which was all about the advancement of freedom and liberty, which are the two words in Greek, eleutheria and isonomia, which are the two words there. So the point being, Christ called us to be salt and light. We as Christians should change the environment that we come in contact with. That's what salt and light do. So why should we then not care about changing government to be more Christ-like?
Well, you're conflating changing government to be more Christ-like with what I was discussing was nationalistic endeavors, which is the inherent view that our nation is better than other nations.
Well, it is.
Well, God shows no partiality. So
well, no, that's not true. God says in Revelation, I will judge the nations. God says that
nations means ethnicity groups, not mean borders of countries established.
Not necessarily. Hold on.
It does.
God says the Constitution of Israel will come at the end of the age. Borders is biblical. The entire book of Nehemiah is about building a wall around the nation of Israel. In fact, the idea of borders, the idea of sovereignty is an explicitly biblical idea.
Yes, but Israel is no longer defined by the physical borders. It's actually defined in the spiritual sons and daughters of God.
That's a Catholic interpretation.
That's not just Catholic.
Again, it's primarily a Catholic interpretation. I don't share it. I don't want to get in that theological debate.
Okay.
Because we're going to get nowhere. My mind won't be changed. Your mind won't be changed. But around nationalism, why don't you tell me, and I will listen, what a Christian's role in government should or should not be?
Simple. The Sermon on the Mount. Operate in that way, and
what does that look like in practice in America in 2020?
Well, in practice, it doesn't look like what has happened in history with Christians who have tried to establish their governance in the lands. For example, American history, slavery. Majority of white Christians supported the institution of slavery. Move on to Jim Crow.
That's actually not true.
No, that is true. That is true.
Time out. 9 out of 13 of the states, by the time of the ratification of the Constitution, were already abolishing slavery. 9 out of 13.
Let's move on to Jim Crow.
Time out. Slavery actually had a minority approval rating by the time of the U.S. founding. We were the second nation ever to abolish slavery because of Christianity. So let me just ask a very moral question. The Christians that got involved in the abolition of slavery, like John Quincy Adams and William Wilberforce, they did it in the name of Christ. Were they wrong?
No, but those were small minority Christians. Majority of the Christians of the time. Let's move on to Jim Crow, because majority.
You're moving on
No,
because
I just finished my statement.
But it was
You're interrupting my
Christianity that
statement.
abolished slavery.
It was a sect in Christianity that abolished it. It was a remnant of Christians who didn't go with the established order of what Christians believe.
Well, no.
We can go to Jim Crow. Let me finish the statement, please.
Okay, I mean-
In Jim Crow, majority of white Christians also supported not abolishing Jim Crow and keeping the institution. They did not support the civil rights movement. This is documented data.
Well, not supporting the Civil Rights Act and
So this is an interesting conversation here. I thought it was a good debate. You guys can run over to Charlie's channel because I want to give him his due views. Charlie does hard work on his content, so shout out to Charlie Kirk. But I think it's a great, back and forth for people who, let's just say, are curious about nationalism and Christianity, and that is a real space. There are people. I wouldn't say it's a completely political space, but you don't really hear that. That's not common talk on Sunday at church. Let's just say that. But it is a space for it. I've sat in spaces like that where people have asked these questions. He's touching on a lot of things, this young man, that I see in a lot of spaces I'm at, especially at work or like dealing with the youth, when he's asking certain questions about how can you be a nationalist and a Christian? Where is that at in scripture? Especially when some of his views on the nation of Israel. Where he says God no longer has those type of borders. Now the nation of Israel is more of a spiritual thing than it is. I guess you can say than it is a locational thing or actual physical thing. So he's not saying that Israel. He doesn't think Israel is separate, from the Gentiles. He thinks that it's just one spiritual family right now, including Israel, meaning that there's nothing special to them. I don't know if I wholeheartedly agree with that. If you guys heard me in the background, I said it's also an erroneous stance. I do believe that. I do. There are some who have some theologians and historians in the past who have thought that way, and you really have both sides. If I'm transparent with you guys, I personally don't take that stance, and I think there's scripture for that. You can look at Romans 11 where it talks about God's mercy for Israel, and Paul is being pretty explicit about God's called him to be the apostle to the Gentiles, and how he's preaching to them in hopes that the Jews and the nation of Israel will become jealous and want what they have. So I think there's scripture for the stance that I take, but like I said, there's two different schools of thought, so I'm not going to sit here and just say there's one. All right, guys, so shout out to Charlie Kirk. Next, we're going to move on to next up with Mark Halperin. Shout out to Mark. We watch Mark on the channel pretty frequently, as much as I can, if I'm not being a little biased sometimes. But the Democratic Party is heading for a civil war between the AOC and Schumer wings. The Newt Gingrich. Let's take a listen.
I think one of the biggest stories of the last 4 months, and really go back further, but more impactful is present, is the degree to which woke culture in all its manifestations is on the retreat. It's almost an unfathomable story. The only thing I can compare it to is at the end of the Cold War, as Eastern European countries started to change so quickly, and the Berlin Wall came down. If you look at Silicon Valley, so many of the leaders there are now not just neutral, but they're very pro-Trump. Their employees, I thought, would revolt. They have not, or at least not openly. The Washington Post owner announces, we're not going to endorse Kamala Harris. I thought there'd be mass resignations. A lot of people have left the paper, but the paper continues to run. Harvard, although they're at war with the president, clearly on the retreat. So much has changed in the culture where political correctness is no longer, terrorizing people. I'm just wondering if you think what's happened has happened simply because of the firm actions of this administration, or did they basically just tap into something that was already ripe to happen?
Well, you may remember the story, the childhood story about the emperor who had no clothing.
Yeah.
And all of his advisors had told him that having no clothing was great and that it was exactly what he should do. And as he's walking down the street, this little boy goes, he's naked. And the emperor looks around and suddenly realizes, yeah, I'm naked. You guys are crazy. I think what happened was there's a remarkable story to be told someday, which at least goes back to the early 60s. And I wrote some of it for The Spectator a while back. The American left has roots all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century. of despising American bourgeois culture, believing the average person's incompetent. I mean, Woodrow Wilson said publicly that we have to have experts because normal people can't make decisions. And that process of thought has grown and mutated for over a century. It gained, in Lenin's sense, the commanding heights. The universities, the news media, the people from the universities began to infiltrate the corporations. So the 29-year-old assistant to the president is totally left-wing nutso and gets the president to do things stupid like having a transvestite for Bud Light. I mean, you look at what was going on, but everybody thought that it was unavoidable. It was irritating. We wish it wasn't happening, but what can you do about it? Where Trump is sort of amazing is he intuited that among a huge block of Americans, much bigger than his vote actually, that people despise this. We do a project called the America's New Majority Project, which people can go to the website, and we've been taking polling since 2018. And you ask questions, for example, should boys be in girls' sports? No, 15% say yes. Should teachers control everything that happens to children with no knowledge of the parent? 15% say yes. You can go down a whole series of these things. And what you have is an AOC who's much more radical culturally than Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is an old-time left-wing socialist. AOC's worldview, which is very central to the Democratic Party, has really become dominant. Ultimately, has a base so small that they're going to be crushed if they stay there. Yep. And what happened was Trump stood up, starting really in 15 and 16, when his first attacks on illegal immigration horrified people. You may remember the first Fox debate where he got in this brutal knockdown with Megyn Kelly. That woman you flinched, I flinched, Calista flinched, watching it on TV. I watched the Frank Luntz focus group. Everybody in the elite said he lost this debate. And I began looking at the various websites where people could vote, and he was getting 70% in a field of 16. And by midnight that night, I thought, there is a phenomenon building here that none of us understand. And I think that Trump was tapping the root of people who are sick and tired of being told they have to suffer lies. And so, I mean, just the act, and again, this is radical, the act of saying there are two sexes, male and female. Biologically true, very different than the cultural issue of gender. But just the act of saying that was, of course, verboten. And people are now, and this is where Europeans are in deep trouble, and in Canada, because the structures there, the elites, are desperately clinging to power in order to impose lies on their population. And in every single one of those countries, people are beginning to rebel in terms of populist movements.
I know it's a mixed picture, but I'm going to ask you to answer binary. Is the American left adjusting to the reality that they're out of step on so many cultural issues and moving towards change? Or do you think they're more dug in and still have their eyes closed on things like trans athletes in women's girls' sports?
You may be the best political reporter right now. So I'm going to venture out here, and then you can explain to me whether I'm close to right. I believe they're heading towards a civil war. I believe that the rational, I mean, in a sense, AOC and Schumer is a perfect model. Schumer is the old time, yes, I'm a liberal, but let's not be crazy. Right. AOC is, well, if you're not crazy, you can't be a Democrat. And I think that it seems to me in place after place, you're going to have that kind of a fight.
All right, I appreciate your kind words. I don't know the answer to the question, so I can't help you.
I was hoping you were going to tell me the answer.
Yeah, I'm still working on it.
True or false?
But New makes a great point, right? He says Chuck is the old schooler, right? He's the old timer. He's the one that says, hey, I'm a Democrat, but let's not get crazy. And AOC is the one that says, well, if you're not crazy, then you're not a Democrat, right? So, and it's interesting that he puts it that way, because that's exactly kind of what we see if we think about the two crazy ends, like the drastic ends of the spectrum when it comes to AOC and Chuck Schumer, and not just age, right? But like I said, the Democrats, I feel like they have a problem with the transfer of leadership. I really do. I feel like we're seeing a problem with them passing the baton. We see that the Republican Party, I feel like, has a better grasp on this. And yeah, we can say it's because primarily a lot of President Trump's cabinet is millennials, right? There are some people who are older than that there, but we could say a good amount of them are millennials. And I feel like in the Democratic Party, it's a problem. I mean, let's just we went over the fact that AOC lost to, was it Mitchell, was it O'Connell? I think it was O'Connell. He's 76 years old. So we went over that, and that happened much earlier in the year. But how the Democratic Party, a lot of the younger people in the party were devastated over her loss, and they talked about it. They said that they were devastated because it seems like their party is not in favor of letting younger leadership kind of step up and take the reins, which is pretty sad. So let's go ahead and switch gears, guys. We're going to jump over to Thomas Sowell reacts. Sowell exposes CBS host the real dangers to America's free speech. All right, guys. So we're gonna start off with CNN reacting, and then it's gonna move on. So let's take a listen.
If commencement speeches are meant to prepare grads for the world they're about to dive into, Scott Pelley essentially told them, "No more life jackets for you."
Our sacred rule of law is under attack. Journalism is under attack. Universities are under attack. Freedom of speech is under attack. And insidious fear is reaching through our schools, our businesses, our homes, and into our private thoughts. The fear to speak in America.
The 60 Minutes host was brutally real about the state of America, one that there is some evidence to back up, but despite their affinity for free speech, MAGA didn't want to hear it.
But a prominent journalist like Scott Pelley stands before a graduating class and declares that freedom of speech is under attack, accompanied by dire warnings of an insidious fear gripping America. One might expect a flood of evidence to follow, specific laws repealed, voices silenced by force, or institutions shuttered. Instead, we get theatrical rhetoric, vague illusions, and the kind of emotional blackmail that thrives on fear, not facts. And in his May 2025 commencement address at Wake Forest University, Pelley claimed that our sacred rule of law, journalism, universities, and free speech itself are under siege, painting a picture of a nation trembling in silence. This is not just hyperbole, it is a deliberate distortion, a myth peddled by the self-anointed class who seek to control discourse by exaggerating threats. Today, I want to dismantle these myths with the clarity of reason and the weight of evidence. Free speech in America is not under attack. It is freer than ever before, thanks to unprecedented legal protections and technological platforms. The real danger lies not in censorship, but in the propaganda and narratives, like Pelley's, that manipulate public perception to preserve ideological power. Let us begin with the heart of Pelley's claim, delivered with the gravitas of a 60 Minutes host. Our sacred rule of law is under attack. Journalism is under attack. Universities are under attack. Freedom of speech is under attack. And insidious fear is reaching through our schools, our businesses, our homes, and into our private thoughts. The fear to speak in America. These are not arguments, they are assertions, wrapped in emotional urgency and devoid of specifics. In the vision of the Anointed, I wrote, the Anointed do not so much have a vision of society as they have a vision of themselves as superior beings with a mission. Pelley's speech exemplifies this. He positions himself as a defender of sacred institutions, warning of a nebulous fear without citing a single law, policy, or act of censorship to substantiate his claims. This is the tactic of the Anointed, to inflame passions, to paint dissent as destruction, and to cast themselves as saviors of a society they claim is crumbling. Let us examine the state of free speech in America with clear eyes. The First Amendment remains a bedrock.
I don't know, to cast themselves as some type of hero to a crumbling society. Almost sounds like the agenda of the Democratic Party, right? Not saying that it is, like allegedly, almost sounds like that type of agenda.
Talked about legal system, protecting expression from government interference in ways unimaginable in most of human history. Landmark Supreme Court cases, New York Times versus Sullivan in 1964, Texas versus Johnson in 1989, Citizens United versus FEC in 2010, have consistently upheld the right to speak, even when the speech offends or challenges power. Public universities bound by the Constitution cannot ban speakers based on their views, as reaffirmed in cases like Healy versus James, 1972. In 2023 alone, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression successfully defended dozens of students and faculty against speech restrictions, ensuring campuses remain forums for debate. Compare this to the McCarthy era when dissenters were blacklisted, or the early 20th century when socialist speakers were jailed under the Espionage Act. By any historical measure, free speech today is robust, not under siege. Technology has amplified this freedom exponentially. Platforms like X, with over 1.5 billion monthly users as of 2025, allow ordinary Americans to debate, critique, and share ideas instantly, bypassing the gatekeepers of legacy media. Substack, Rumble, and countless podcasts democratize discourse, enabling voices from all perspectives to reach millions. When Pele delivered his speech, it was broadcast nationwide, discussed on X, and debated in real time by conservatives, liberals, and independents alike. The very existence of this debate, on air, online, and in public forums, undermines his claim of a fear to speak. If anything, the problem is not silence, but noise, an abundance of voices, some shouting propaganda as Pele does to drown out reason. Consider the irony. Pele claims free speech is under attack while standing at a podium on a major network with his words amplified across the globe. His employer, CBS, faced no legal censorship for airing his speech, though it did face scrutiny for allegedly editing a Kamala Harris interview to favor a political narrative, prompting a $20 billion lawsuit from President Trump. This lawsuit, cited by Pele's critics as evidence of media bias, is not an attack on journalism, but a call for accountability.
And I'm going to stop right there. A call for accountability, because I couldn't agree with Thomas so more. I could not. Now, here's what I'll say about mainstream media. It's no secret that for the most part, mainstream media leans pretty left, right? That's no secret. I don't think I really have a problem with that. I think I have a problem with the fact that they spin, right? That's why I like Bill O'Reilly, the no spin news, right? They spin the truth. They pervert the truth. They don't tell the truth. And that's the problem. If you're not going to tell the American people the truth, then why are you there? Like, we don't want to hear you come on and give us half of the story, or fluff up the story, or even water down the story. And we don't want you editing anything, right? If someone says something that isn't to your liking, or you feel like it's going to embarrass the person, well, guess what? That's how they answer the question. I'm live right now. If I say something stupid, guess what? Oh, well, I'm live, right? So you have to live with that. That's the point of being transparent. But it's not something that we see in mainstream media. I also want to point something else out. The way we see this speech delivered, it gave me memories of how they kind of came at Jasmine Crockett about her speech, right? She did a speech, a small college, man, I don't want to say the wrong state, but it was a smaller college down south, and she was pretty much bashed for the speech that she gave, because it pretty much promoted the same type of rhetoric, right? It promoted fear. It promoted, hey, something's wrong. Someone's fighting against you. You know, you're not in this free of a country as you think you are. It was giving that type of vibes. Let's just say that, and people bashed her for it, literally, because they literally said you're going to a college to give a speech to graduates, and you're promoting fear. You're pushing a rhetoric of fear instead of being positive, instead of telling these students what the future may hold. Just because you feel like the future doesn't hold anything like bright, right, doesn't mean that it's actually the truth. But yet they're going to commencement ceremonies, and they're giving commencement speeches, and this is the type of stuff that they're saying during their speeches, and they're getting backlash for it because it's not positive. And it's not true. You can't go on a stage and just talk about your feelings just because you don't agree with your president, mind you, right? Because he's not the president of the Republicans. So just because you don't agree with your president and you're like, hey, you know what? You're in a country where you're not even allowed to have your own type of thoughts. You don't have freedom of speech. Listen, Thomas Sowell is a black man saying that speech is freer than it's ever been before. Is there censorship? Of course, we're not crazy to that, right? As we see YouTube, all types of places doing it all of the time. But nonetheless, you can literally just go on another platform and do the same thing where it's a good chance your stuff probably won't be taken down, right? Maybe, possibly until it's found. So with that being said, I think that it's horrible that we're seeing this type of rhetoric pushed at universities. Jasmine Crockett's speech wasn't exactly, like his. I would, if I'm honest, I would say his was a little bit more, and people want to say the liberals are trying to push fear into everybody. I would say his speech was giving more that type of vibe than hers was. But she did allude and she did say certain things. She did allude to and say certain things that, kind of made people feel like, okay, like, are you giving this speech to, bash your president? Are you giving this speech to show that you're actually not in favor of, your president's cabinet? So I'm just saying that's what it was giving, guys. If you have a live link, I'll join you in a conversation in our friendly debate. What's up, Timmy? Yeah, that's fine. We can have a conversation. I mean, I don't really get on here to debate people, but if you want to bring up, a school of thought you have or a perspective or what do I think about something, I don't have a problem doing that live. I mean I talk live every single day, right? We all do. So the only difference is that we would be on YouTube live. So yeah, I can send you a live link or something like that the next time I jump on, or if you leave a comment on the video, on the live stream video, then I'll just see your comment, and when you jump in the next, let me know maybe a topic or two that you're thinking about talking about. Yeah, and if you want, we can hop on a live stream together real quick where probably a lot of people won't join, but if they do, I don't care, and then we can make it private and go live stream again, or we can do whatever you want to do, Timmy. Shout out to you. Thanks for dropping by. All right, guys, so let's end the live stream with a Christian clip from Cliff Buell, one of my favorite YouTube content creators. Shout out to Cliff Buell. If you guys get a chance, go and watch his channel. Last name Buell. All right, topic of today: U.S. government defense appeals to Jesus. Let's take a listen.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is defending prayer in Jesus. Watch.
The question is, I got some criticism for hosting a Christian prayer service at the Pentagon yesterday. We said it very publicly. We said it very proudly. Appealing to heaven, to God, is a long-standing tradition in our military. I'm very proud that we're starting a monthly voluntary service at the Pentagon. George Washington was on bended knee with the troops, praying for God's providence and protection in that moment. Chaplains and ministers and Christians and people of faith across generations have prayed because of the business that we're in. The business of the 82nd Airborne, and you watch that 911 button for the country, is a dangerous one on behalf of all of us. And we appeal to God. I appeal to Jesus Christ for that protection. We're going to speak that. We're going to be open and willing to talk about that at the Pentagon. If they want to criticize that, they're on the wrong side of a very important issue. So thanks for coming with us today. We'll see you on the other side.
They're on the wrong side of a very important issue. Shout out to Pete Hegseth, man. Listen, man, I might have not always been the most impressed with him, but since he's been a part of President Trump's cabinet, I think he's been doing a pretty good job. Now, I can be biased, because I am a Marine. Semper Fi, shout out to all my Marines. But I'm just saying, I think he's been doing a pretty good job. To get criticized for doing a prayer at the Pentagon, I actually watched that prayer. It was a pretty decent prayer. I just thought to myself, wow, I agree with him. You're on the wrong side of a very important issue. You're on the wrong side of eternity. Nonetheless, an important issue. So I think it's just, I think it's hilarious how bold he is. And I enjoy him being this courageous about it and being able to stand up and say, hey, this is something I'm excited. Hey, what's up, Timmy? I'm excited too, man. This is something that I'm pretty excited about because he's not scared to talk about it, Some people are pretty quiet about their faith, which to each is his own. I have friends that, hey, they are pretty public with their faith to the point where they they're like an evangelist type level. And then I have people who are very private with their faith where they will tell you, yes, I believe in Jesus and I love Jesus, but I don't particularly like to talk about it publicly. There's some Bible for that, but I don't apply pressure to people. It's wherever they're at the moment. You know, if God's not offended by where they're at, I'm not offended by where they're at. All right, guys. So with that being said, I have another meeting to jump into, so I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I'll be live later on tonight, probably around 7, 8ish for a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and end live stream. There's no such thing as logic without God. I absolutely believe that, Timmy. I absolutely do. That's why I don't believe in coincidences. Like, people always think I'm weird because of that, and they're like, "How could you not believe in coincidences?" And sometimes I'm like, "How can you?" But if you are not familiar with the character of God, I guess coincidences seem normal to you. That's why I said it's, even if it's something that we don't agree on, I don't think it would be a debate, and that's not because I'm scared. I actually love debates. I just like to talk to people. You know, I'm a pretty open person at this point in my life. I blame it on me almost turning 40. So that's probably why I don't have the same argumentative spirit I had in my 20s and in my early 30s. Not that I don't have the zeal. It's just kind of like I'm better at picking and choosing my battles. Let's just say that. I get a lot further with conversation. Yeah, well, I can do that. I'm also 39. Yeah, we're actually the same age. So yeah, it's like I don't have that same type of energy. I've learned, like, I get a lot further with just having a conversation with people. So shout out to you guys. I'm gonna go ahead and jump in my meeting. Until next time, guys, take care of yourselves, take care of one another, love yourselves, love one another, and be peaceful. Peace.